Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today on how EU regulation is shaping the future of EPDs. I'm Kelly Taylor, and I'm the CEO of EPD Australasia, and I'm really pleased to be here today with some wonderful international speakers to speak to you on this topic. Apologies for the slight delay in getting going. We were just connecting around the world. We have Sebastian Stiller here from Sweden, CEO of EPD International, and Jane Anderson, Director of Construction LCA, based in the UK. So I'm going to start off with a brief introduction to EPD Australasia and what we do, followed by our guest speakers. We are allowing time at the end for question and answer, so please plug your questions in so that we can address those at the end of our session today. So EPD Australasia was established in 2014, about 12 years ago. It was set up by the Life Cycle Assessment Associations of Australia and New Zealand, who came together and wanted an ISO compliant EPD program for their customers in our region. We are set up as a fully independent company and operate on a not-for-profit basis. We partnered early with EPD International, the oldest EPD program, and we maintain that relationship today. We've recently grown to over 4,000 EPDs and almost 200 EPD owning companies. So we have seen exponential growth over the last few years. We've seen an increase in interest in verified, transparent environmental data. And you can see in the second graph here a bit of a split between Australia and New Zealand. We operate across both, and we see that split reflected there. You'll also see some other countries represented, so EPD owners in Australia and New Zealand, as well as manufacturers that supply into our market. We are part of an umbrella organisation called Ecoplatform. So Ecoplatform, if you like, is an industry association for EPD program operators. They are responsible for setting standards for EPD program operators, and as a regional hub to EPD International, we are audited under their system. And we encourage EPD users, particularly of construction products, to look for this logo as a global sign of quality assurance and credibility. Particularly relevant for the topic today because Ecoplatform is involved in setting standards to ensure that EPDs continue to be relevant and meet regulation going forward. So many of you will be intimately involved in EPDs and have a robust understanding of what they are, but perhaps for those that don't, what is an EPD? It's a standardized communication tool for a life cycle assessment of a product. These are done to very specific program rules, very specific rules for product categories to make sure that they are robust and comparable and presented in a way that can be used. They cover not only carbon footprint, but other indicators as well. In fact, up to over 40 indicators within an EPD representing different environmental impact categories. We're seeing an increase in interest, not just in the carbon disclosure, but in other indicators, including water use, material circularity, recycled content, and the likes. So there's a number of standards that feed into an EPD. We call this the hierarchy of EPD standards. You can see across the bottom of the pyramid, we have the high-level organizational ISO standards. The ISO standard 14025, which defines the standard for EPDs and EPD programs. Then sitting under that, as I said, we have our specific program instructions. We have product category standards that are relevant, and then Ecoplatform standards, as I mentioned before. Ecoplatform has been very involved in the global harmonization of program rules for EPDs. And then we get down to specific product category rules as well. So EPDs, particularly in Australia and New Zealand, just want to talk about the recognition and how they help meet that need for disclosure. EPDs are now standard expectation in many sectors, and there's recognition in particularly in construction products within Green Star and the Infrastructure Sustainability Rating Scheme, as well as other schemes within our region. So local recognition, as well as today looking at international influences on EPDs. Green Star has just increased the recognition of EPDs in the Responsible Products Framework up from 5 points to 7, which is great news for EPDs in our region. You can use the link below to read more about that one. And I guess the thought that I'd like to leave you with is that Australasian EPDs are future ready. So talking today with our international experts, Australasian EPDs are prepared for upcoming regulations and standards through our affiliation with EPD International and Eco Platform, ready for digital product passports, Scope 3 reporting, and other areas in which the EPD data can feed into, such as planetary accounting. There's many more, but that's just a snapshot. Here at EPD Australasia, we're doing our part to make transparent, verified environmental information accessible to all manufacturers, and we've recently just reduced our fees to SMEs to increase accessibility to those manufacturers and organisations. So I'd like to finish up my part there and hand over to our guest speakers. I just popped this up here so that our email is available. Please do follow up with us if you have any questions or comments that come up after the webinar. But just a reminder as well to pop your questions now into the chat and we can follow those up in our Q&A at the end of the session. So firstly, I would like to welcome Sebastian to speak with us. So Sebastian is a senior sustainability professional with more than 20 years experience. He brings an international background of both corporate and consulting roles in environmental services, energy and infrastructure, and manufacturing sectors. He holds an MBA in sustainability management. He's the CEO of EPD International and a board member of Eco Platform. Thanks, Sebastian.
Thank you very much, Kelly, for this comprehensive introduction. Also, congratulations to your milestone that you have achieved with achieving the 4,000 EPDs, of course, in our system. And looking forward to your second milestone, also then tipping the 200 clients that you serve also in Australasian market. And I apologize for that. Yes, my presentation is about 15 minutes, and I'm going to talk a little bit about EPDs as a strategic asset for companies to support decarbonisation strategies. I do this by firstly talking about, but only touching on it because we already got a very comprehensive introduction what an EPD is. But I also introduced the international EPD system, and then I will spend most of my time on why we need EPDs. And in the EU, we call them then in the future not an EPD, no longer, but a Declaration of Performance and Conformity, so a DOPC. So I will touch upon the EU regulation framework. But as you heard, 4,000 EPDs from Australia are also available in the EPD library of the international EPD system. So we are a global program operator. And as that, I just very proud also to stand here today and tell you that EPD is the longest standing, first and longest established EPD program in the world. And it was actually founded by the Swedish Environmental Protection Agency already in 1997. So the first EPD found its light in 1998. We, as the international EPD system, as the network, we provide globally, on a global level, recognized system for developing EPDs. And we support this by a robust digital platform for registration, publication, and also data access, because the EPD is more and more being used also for decision making, as we see later. Similar to our partner for Australasia, we are 100% owned by a Swedish not-for-profit organization, Swedish Environmental Research Institute. We currently have more than 35 staff in the secretariat. And we also have a truly global presence through 13 international licensees, so a franchising network that we use, including, of course, our partner here in Australasia. By doing so, we are an international license network. We enable local implementation with global consistency. So for us, it's very important that manufacturers are looking for a single program operator serving the world, so not that you have to switch too many programs meeting specific needs. Also important to mention, we are currently under accreditation for notification under this new regulation that I will inform you about, also supporting our clients then to transition from a mandatory into a regulatory framework for EPD, so for environmental performance reporting. In total, we currently have almost 21,000 valid EPDs, so valid, ready to download for free. And we have more than 3,000 clients that we serve on the global scale. As we said, we are more than 28 years now in market, and we have roughly 260 PCRs, so product category rules. So cookbooks for the EPD, how to conduct the LCA for the EPD, that we have published through our system. In short, we already know what an EPD is, but it's an ISO standard driven framework, as Kelly explained. But for the regulation that I'm going to touch upon, it's important to understand that we have also, I would say, industry specific standards like the EN 15804, and the counterpart on the global level would be the ISO 21930 that we're complying with, because this is what drives, I would say, sector specific regulation, as we learn later. An EPD in itself is possible to do on any kind of product family or product category. We have them for airplanes, we have them for sanitary products, we have them for, you just name it, textiles, but 90% of our EPDs are coming actually currently from the construction materials industry. And that brings us also to the question, why do we need all these EPDs? Why do we need these declarations? Yes, and I will touch upon that. I would say very important to understand is that an EPD is the foundation for decarbonizing the built environment, because we know that EPDs are critical in carbon zero strategies for manufacturers or also for nations when they set their objectives, because you can report the emissions that are coming from material extraction, manufacturing, transport, and installation. We have cradle to gate, but also cradle to grave EPDs. Most of them will be. But it's important that an EPD is also becoming more and more digital, because moving from 20 to 200 or 300,000 EPDs that will become mandatory more or less, you also need to have the infrastructure to manage such a sheer amount of data that you will need to handle with. All in all, an EPD operationalizes the decarbonization by converting product level environmental data into actionable insights for reducing embodied emissions. So it's a prerequisite for achieving net zero carbon in the built environment. And this is important because EPDs more and more support different kinds of stakeholders, including the manufacturer, but also the legislator to aid in legislative implementation for decision making. Because in the end, what you want to do, if you want to compare products, whether it's at a early design or at a as-built stage of a building or a product material, you want to take an informed decision. You want to know what actually is in it, not only what is the cost, but also what the environmental impact is of such a product. As that, an EPD is a facilitator of global trade because it enhances product competitiveness by demonstrating sustainability compliance. It is a way of standardized, harmonized sharing of environmental data on a global scale. Therefore, it also simplifies cross-border trade, and it is also improving market access for you as a manufacturer, because you gain better access because you not only comply, but also you can differentiate your product by having an environmental declaration. The picture that I share here is also, I think, a nice overview on showing where legislation is accepting or adopting environmental reporting requirements. So here, where I would say LCA or an EPD is moving from a voluntary into a mandatory requirement. We can see Europe, we can see the US, we can see also parts of Australia becoming mandatory. So there's a lot of legislation or regulation that is quasi legislation or is actually actual legislation by the regulator that is adopting the principles of life cycle and also reporting them in an EPD or a similar framework. As I mentioned, it's very important to adopt and embrace a scalable open digital EPD ecosystem. We at the EPD International System, also with Australasia as a partner, we offer an open and agnostic digital ecosystem. So we're not linked to a specific software provider. We work with everybody who's meeting those requirements, the quality requirements. We manage an EPD portal that is also becoming more and more introduced into your local market, your national market. It is a scalable platform, so we're prepared for the future. We work with APIs, upstream and downstream, as we call it, so for receiving data, but also for sharing of data. And as that, it's a fairly good established ecosystem, I would argue right now, where we are leading the market. So it means we have a service that was introduced that you can use for fully automated digitized EPD data sharing. The compile itself is digital by design. It supports strengthening of quality and consistency in the EPD because the human error is taken out of the equation to the extent that we can. It has also hard validation rules that are very hard to manage in a PDF. And as that, it's also future-proof for integration. Yeah, so why is this important? Because we talked about EPDs moving from a voluntary into a mandatory requirement. And with the Construction Products Regulation 2024 here in Europe, we also have a mandatory requirement to start working with digital product passports. So when we will need to report mandatorily from 27 onwards, it needs to be also happening in a digital format. Important to understand is that the CPR is setting the legal framework. So we're moving, like I said, from a voluntary into a mandatory requirement, where the European Commission is setting the rules, so no longer the market. And it affects an estimated 300 to 400,000 companies in Europe who will need to deliver an X amount of millions of LCA calculations in a digital format moving forward in time. Very quickly, how it all links up. So the regulatory framework in the European Commission is pretty straightforward, I would argue. We have on top so-called framework legislation, which is the Ecodesign for Sustainable Product Regulation. And it sets the general framework. Under that, we have so-called specific sector-specific regulation that specifies how these environmental data are developed and needs to be provided in the sense of sharing. In this CPCR, we follow the EN 1504 as a normative standard, a reference standard. And an EPD is becoming a DOPC. So it's not identical. We will see that later also when Jane Anderson, I think, will explain that. But it's moving into the so-called harmonized zone where we adopt harmonized European standards with complementary rules on not only on what, but also on how to report future DOPC. And this also then links into other methodologies and other kind of frameworks that we have, like the EU taxonomy, the EPBD for sustainable buildings, or also for public procurement. Now you wonder, is then the EPD becoming obsolete? No, the EPD will remain valid, but it's important that we align because besides this harmonized zone where the legislator is setting the rules, we also have a non-harmonized zone. So here you can think about products that are in a building, but are not part of a so-called CE mark. So it's not a CE mark product, so it doesn't have a harmonized standard. But still, as a manufacturer, you need or you want to provide that information because it's relevant for the building level LCA that needs to be conducted, for example, under the EPD. So here it's important for us as a program operator, also on a global scale, to harmonize with those new requirements coming from the legislator. So is this a big bang? No. We know that in the European Commission, the Act, actually, the CPR 2024 is already valid from 2026. So it's not that it's not happening. But what we do see is that the product families where we develop the so-called harmonized standards and the CPCRs, these complementary rules, those have a short delay. So as of today, actually no product family under the CPR 2024, except there's one that is on stoves that falls under the old Construction Products Regulation. You can report or you must report environmental performance. It only starts with when the product family So concrete or precast concrete, for example, has a revised harmonized European standard that also contains the required CPCR requirements, so the additional rules on how to conduct this, and needs to be cited. And then we go into a so-called transition period. This is, I would say, typically 1 year. So timing is important. We know that some of these product families are slightly delayed, but we do know that we will start product family by product family. The first products that we can expect to be coming to market with mandatory reporting are cement and concrete. But then we will also slowly ramp up after 2030 with new product families, including, for example, windows and doors, aggregates, and you just name it. So in total, there are 36 of those families that fall under this CPR regulation, and we expect to reach full coverage around 2040. If you're interested in it, of course, this whole regulation is available. You can read out with the technical document. But what we also do as EPD International, as I mentioned earlier, we're here to support you because we also want to support manufacturers who are transitioning from an EPD into a mandatory DUPC. And we do this by, as I mentioned, setting up a new entity, which is becoming a notified body that will also support manufacturers in the validation work. So it will become an accredited notified body under AVS 3+, which is the new validation system that we're currently developing to respond to the CPR 2024. We do this in Sweden because we need to respond to the national accreditation body who is managing the accreditation and notification here in Sweden. But once we are accredited and notified, and we expect to be this end of this year, the latest, we of course then also conserve a global clientele because we can offer our services globally, so irrespective of where we are from. And I think this is what I want to say here. We're currently doing a lot of pilots with manufacturers as we speak because they want to understand. Because the CPR, of course, has a transition period, but you don't, as a manufacturer, you don't want to wait until the CPR, your product family is mandatory. So here the advice from my side is start doing EPDs, start working with EPDs, because then you know how to do DOPC. It's not identical, but very, very similar. And together with our partner, EPD Australasia, of course, we as EPD International are here to serve clients that are working on a global scale and exporting of goods to Europe, for example. And that is it from my side. When I just can quickly summarize, an EPD is becoming more and more a strategic asset to manufacturers. It benefits multiple stakeholders, like I said, manufacturers promoting green products in the sense of declaring the performance, but also aiding regulators in policy enforcement, as we can see. It supports regional growth and adaptation. It also supports collaboration for sustainable development because it builds local capacity through our partner, for example, in Australasia. We are also supporting you in the transition from voluntary to mandatory reporting. And very important here for us, very dear, is also building this kind of a knowledge transfer by having intensive dialogues and strategic relationships with, for example, European Commission, where the rules are being developed so that we can try to influence them in the interest of also, of course, of our clients. So thank you for that, Kelly, and I would like to hand over to Jane. Sorry for that mistake.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sebastian. Just like to now introduce Jane Anderson. She's the Director of Construction LCA based in the UK. She's a leading expert on embodied carbon and environmental product declarations in the construction sector. Jane is a verifier for EPD Australasia as well as a number of other EPD programs internationally. She's the co-chair of the Technical Working Group of Eco Platform and is involved in sustainable construction standardisation efforts, both in the UK and internationally. She holds a PhD on the role of EPDs in embodied carbon reduction. Thanks, Jane.
Hi, good afternoon or evening to you all. So following on from what Sebastian has said, I'm going to give a little bit more information about the construction products regulation and who comes under it and what it will mean, the time frame, just kind of repeating, but a little bit more detail than Sebastian gave you, and how it will work, and kind of explain whether you'll still need EPD, and a little bit about the benefits and where you can find some further information if you're more interested. Oh, sorry. So effectively, if people are already, for example, exporting products, sorry, turn off my video because I think my connection's a bit unstable. You'll be familiar with CE marking, so providing the kind of performance-based information for something like insulation, the thermal performance for steel, the strength of it. And effectively, what's happening now in the new CPR is that in addition to that, environmental information similar to that that's provided in an EPD will be required, basically for any product that is marketed in the EU. So if you don't market your products in the EU, you don't need to provide this DOPC. It's only if you're actually exporting your products into Europe. And as Christian said, it isn't going to be called an EPD, it's going to be called a DOPC, that will provide this information, and it will be provided digitally, potentially in ways that can be kind of read by humans in a kind of interactive format, but it won't be a kind of PDF as you kind of know the current EPDs. Sorry. In terms of the timing, so as Christian said, the regulation is currently in force, and even from the 8th of January, according to this, it became a requirement to declare the GWP impacts of products. But basically, this is only, these requirements to declare environmental indicators only come into force once you have a harmonised standard that provides the rules for declaring that environmental information. And so until you've actually got that CPCR harmonised standard, that there's absolutely no obligation. And once that, you have a year before it becomes mandatory. Initially, as we say, only to provide the GWP indicators. From 2030, all the core indicators that you're familiar with from an EPD, and from 2032, all the environmental indicators, including the current optional ones. But even with this time frame, it's still going to take a long time. So in terms of the process, first of all, in order to get this harmonised CPCR standard, the product TC, the technical committee, needs to get a standardisation request that asks them to do this. And this is what has currently happened for cement and concrete, and these are the only two products that have actually got final standardisation requests. There are draft standardisation requests, for example, for windows and metals that are still being discussed. Once that standardisation request has been accepted by CEN, and there's been discussions about what's included, what they need to do, what requirements the Commission are providing for that standard, then they have to actually CPCR. Now, you'll potentially be familiar with the existing CPCR standards in CEN. These are not harmonised, and they will probably be the basis of these CPCRs where they exist. But these CPCRs will be more extensive. The requirement that they have is basically they need to be a lot more prescriptive. They need to eliminate, as far as possible, the kind of interpretation that is there, and there will be a lot fewer choices in them. So, for example, for declared units, there will be now within a large project group like insulation, that could still be broken down into different types of insulation and different declared units for those sort of subgroups within it. But effectively, whereas in an EPD you would have text that describes the declared unit, and it might be different within a product category. Within the CPCR and these CPCR standards, there will be a single declared unit for that individual product group that must be used, and it won't even be part of what's provided. You will have to go back to the standard to find out and know, and then all products will have that same, or all products of that group will have that same declared unit. So once this draft standard has been produced, it needs to be checked by CEN/TC 350 that developed EN 15804 to make sure that it complies with 15804, and also that there is a kind of horizontal alignment all these new CPCRs so that we don't have different rules, different interpretations in different product groups. So that process will ensure that that happens, and then the European Commission check the standard. If they're happy that it meets the original standardisation request and it's been approved by TC 350, then it will be published as a harmonised standard. In terms of timing to actually develop a CPCR standard, it can be shorter, but typically it takes at least 2 years. So it's not going to be a quick process from the provision of a request for standardisation. So even if your product group sort of comes up, it's still potentially going to take 2 or 3 years before you actually would have to provide the DOPC for your product if you're exporting. Covered by the regulator, you can see that some of these requests have been produced, some of them are kind of pending, and some of these are kind of fast tracking through the process. But as Christian said, we expect the last of these to actually come through around 2040, so it's not going to be a kind of quick process, because it's recognised that to have the capacity to actually do this, it can't all be done at once. And the reason for all of this is because of the need to actually do the building level LCA and to be choosing products to kind of reduce carbon. And effectively what's a sort of one big part of it is that individual member states in Europe, where it's going to be a requirement to produce to do building level assessment for new buildings from 2028 for buildings over 1,000 metres squared and 2030 for all other new buildings. They will have to use the data that comes from the DOPC if they use the product, and they can't ask for additional information that isn't in the DOPC. So they're not in that sort of position of setting individual rules. So those of you, again, that export into Europe, and currently if you go to France, you have to produce an EPD in the FDS system. If you export into the Netherlands, you have to produce an EPD into or you have to produce environmental data into the Dutch national database. That will all disappear once your product comes under the DOPC. You will just have to provide the DOPC, and those countries will just have to use that data. There won't be this, shall we say, kind of national implementations and requirements. Those will start to disappear. As Christian mentioned, there's also this requirement to provide the information as a digital product passport. So there are various standards being written at the moment and delegated acts coming through to do that. It isn't there yet, and particularly for the environmental information, there are definitely more rules to be provided as to how to digitize the parameterized scenarios that are going to be required for the kind of flexibility to be able to use data across Europe in different situations and for different buildings. But there are definitely benefits from the digital product passport. You know, at the moment, if you think about trying to find an EPD for a product, you know, and we only have 50,000 EPDs to EN 15804 at the moment, kind of registered within EPD programs. It's not easy. You know, there's no standardized kind of classification currently used. You have to know the word for plasterboard in sort of 15 different languages. They may not even call their product passport, you know, a plasterboard. It's incredibly hard to find, you know, EPDs and to be able to select products on the basis of environmental performance. But once we have the digital product passport, because it is going to be a combination of both the environmental data and the technical data that's already provided, it should start to be much more possible to actually select products on the basis of a technical performance and an environmental performance, and potentially, you know, based on location, to be able to actually find products that will reduce the embodied carbon of your building. So, you know, even once the regulation is totally in place, let's say in 2040, there's still going to be kind of a voluntary zone for products that don't come under the CPR, and obviously in countries where the CPR isn't a requirement. So what you need to know is that essentially over time, the CPCRs that are developed, they will, you know, continue to be the basis of developing EPDs, for example, for cement and concrete and steel, once those CPCRs, the harmonised standards, have been developed. Potentially within those standards, there may be to address the provision of kind of more environmental data and information for products that sort of outside the regulated zone, or that were being sold outside of Europe. And it will always be possible to effectively provide a DOPC inside an EPD, so long as it's the same information that you're providing. Kind of in this voluntary zone, obviously there are also kind of generic products, those kind of sector EPDs, for example, products that come under the old CPR, and products that don't come under the CPR at all. We also expect sort of to under the ETA as well. So in terms of the benefits, basically, we expect that the CPCRs that are developed will provide much greater standardization. There will be kind of consistent interpretations of 15804 that are kind of implemented horizontally across all the product sectors, and more clarity. So TC350 over time will progressively give their interpretations that will then need to be implemented, and or the European Commission will set their requirements, for example, for electricity. As I say, for the kind of digitalized information, it should be much easier to develop tools for product selection, the kind of parameterized scenarios, so what we call 100% scenarios when they're kind of fully developed, it will mean that there won't be that situation of having to provide kind of myriads of different EPD to address the different situations in different countries. Those parameterized scenarios should be kind of adaptable, and you should be able to use them to reflect different kind of countries. We're also expecting a kind of clearer approach to the development of RSLs and estimated service lives, and how those can be digitized. As I say, you should be able to use one DOPC across Europe, and that DOPC should then be the basis of what we're calling digital building logbooks for a building that would then be able to that building and the procedures that happen to it over its life. There's some links to further information there if you're interested, and thank you.
Thanks so much, Jane, and Sebastian, for that overview. It's a very complex topic that we're looking at, so it's really good to have some really clear explanation and visuals on that. We do have a little bit of time left for some questions. We've got some questions coming through. I guess one thing would be good to talk about is, we have a lot of EPD owners that are only servicing their domestic market here. So understanding how these changes will kind of filter down and affect them, I think that ultimately, because as you say, this is moving from the data from a voluntary to a mandatory scenario, that will drive standardization of what this environmental data looks like. Is that right? And how else do you think it will affect the likes of the EPD owners and the manufacturers that are just servicing the domestic market, perhaps, and not exporting? Do you have thoughts on that, Jane?
So it's not going to make it mandatory to produce EPD in Australia or New Zealand unless you're exporting into the EU. But obviously there will be more data certainly available in the EU. I think that the big benefit will be the clarity. I mean, we see quite a lot out there at the moment about how EPDs, there's so much variety, people not being able to explain results. So I hope that it will make, I mean, the information will be less transparent, sadly, but there will hopefully be more consistency in the information that's provided. So, yeah.
Sebastian?
Yeah, I think I would like to follow on that line of thinking of Jane. What I do see, of course, is that it will have an impact in the end because there's also an update coming. We are currently looking at the environmental footprint, that is the product environmental footprint framework that we have in EU that the European Commission is trying to push. But we also see now a harmonization effort between the environmental footprint methodology and the EN 1504 that will come with an update in 31, I think, 32. We can expect a new version of the EN 1504. We have big hopes on, I would say, simplification of that standard, but also giving less room for interpretation, as Jane was arguing also earlier. And of course, once this standard is available, it will need to be implemented and adopted by us as a program operator, as the guiding standard, I would argue, for the construction sector. So yes, there will be an impact. There will be changes in how we do LCA for EPD, but for the sake of better consistency and comparability, I would also argue, because we have a couple of program operators currently in the world that don't really care about interpretation of rules. So I think here we will raise the level for all, so the level playing field for all program operators on a global scale, affecting global reporting, but also national reporting.
So you both talked a little bit about the time frames involved, which are quite long time frames. We're not talking about these things kicking in a few months or even next year, but also you both highlighted the sort of preparation time that is required. So if you were advising companies in our region what they could do now, what would be your advice?
I can repeat my advice. It's the learning that we have had also from the environmental footprint, PEFCR discussions in Europe. Manufacturers should not have the put their head in the sand and wait until it's there. I think they should learn the lessons. One of the lessons learned very much in the Nordics is that when you are working with this kind of regulation in preparation, of course, you know your product best. So you know better than anybody else about the performance of your product. So you can also argue with facts, and it makes your organization prepared to respond to mandatory requirements in the future. So my recommendation is don't wait, accept that it will come sooner or later, but don't feel that you're not being prepared. So better to start now doing EPDs so that you can respond to new requirements on the DOPC. We're talking here whole life carbon, whole life LCA. So we know that the CPR, at least for Europe, is coming. I don't know what the plans are for Australasia, make it mandatory, but we have seen regulation coming into place on national level in various countries, including Mexico. I saw a question on the US. Yes, there is the Clean Buy Act in the US as well, also pushing for EPDs in the public procurement. So it's not that that is not happening. And best thing is to be prepared to respond.
Absolutely. And what sort of, I guess following on from that, I know that we have a few LCA consultants listening today. What advice could you give them in terms of preparing and helping them to prepare their clients?
I think being informed is very important, maybe through EPD Australasia, but also Jane, I think, shared a couple of very important links where it's quite informative to better understand the framework, the changes, the differences, need to respond. There's webinars, there is documentation available also from Construction Products Europe. They have a very good brochure, I would argue. And I would say also working with the client towards this change. I mean, what it means also in Europe is that manufacturers will need to invest in getting their data house in order, prepare for digitalization. Factory control is something that is coming. So it's not that, yeah. I mean, as a consultant, I think you should be the contact point for the manufacturers, but that means that you need to be well informed. And there's a lot of information right now available, but I would recommend use official sources, trusted sources, because there's also a lot of misinformation, disinformation in the market. People only saying half the truth, knowing half the truth. So just be considerate in which sources you consult yourself.
Good advice. Thanks, Sebastian. We've got 5 minutes left, 4 minutes left. So just hoping we can quickly tick off some of these questions we've got. There's a few questions around the timeline, so I think we've addressed that. The timelines are unknown to some extent, depending on those CPCRs. We've got a question about digital product passports from Nicholas. Hopefully our speakers can see that today around digital product passports. So Nicholas says, what approach is being taken by EPD systems generating DPPs to ensure that they are interoperable between digital systems? Good question. So Jane, do you have thoughts on that?
So effectively there will be standards. There are standards already there, and there will be very detailed standards for how that digital product passport is supposed to be provided. I don't have to say I don't know the UN Transparency Protocol, but it certainly covers the ISO and CEN standards for digital product data templates that are already in use.
Great. And I think you highlighted as well, Jane, that there's a lot more work to do around the digital product passports, which will come.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Maybe I
Great.
just also want to stress that there's two different kinds of DPP. You have the voluntary digital product passports that are already now being implemented on a voluntary basis. And you have the one that Jane was talking about, that's the mandatory one. And the European Commission now is still working on, she have learned how that works. So don't be confused that there is no single DPP. There are multiple versions or attempts currently in the market as well. Some of them claiming to be compliant, but it's not possible because it's not clear how that future mandatory DPP is going to look like for the European Commission. I just want to stress that.
Mm. I'm just going to jump down to some of the later questions. There's a question that says the presentation really focused on construction products. It did. What happens with other industries like textiles? Will they be included? Will they follow current PCRs? Or will they have a whole new set of rules?
There is of course the ESPR. The ESPR is also linking with the DPP. So digital product passports will also become mandatory ultimately for other other industries and product families, I would argue. But here we are, I would say, at the beginning because we're still forming. We have this called Ecodesign Forum, where we're trying to establish rules. The expectation currently, I would argue, maybe Jane, you know more than that, but the expectation is that they will try to follow EF, so the environmental footprint methodology, although the ESPR is methodology neutral. So actually, we don't know really in detail how this will look like in the future. But under the ESPR, more industries will be affected when they want to report and when they want to substantiate the environmental performance of their products. But right now, of course, we are supporting this with the EPDs, and then the future will tell us to which extent the regulator will set additional rules or new rules. So this is still in the making, I would say. The construction materials industry is not light years ahead, but has quite a big leap forward here.
Indeed. Right, well, we're almost out of time. I guess there's a few other questions around how it might affect EPDs in our region, program rules. I think ultimately it's going to filter down through standardization, which is a good thing, ultimately improving comparability. And that's where this is all heading. So thank you very much to our speakers today, Sebastian and Jane, for making the time very early in your morning. And thank you to everyone who came along today. This is being recorded and will be available on our website in due course. Thank you, everyone, and goodbye.
Thank you, Kelly, for organizing.
Mm-hmm.